From his 20s to his 70s, an actor who, in every single decade without fail, became the lead of the highest-grossing film of that era. Throughout the entire history of cinema, only two people hold this record: Harrison Ford and Sylvester Stallone. However, Sylvester Stallone's story is not a simple success myth. It is the desperate survival story of a man whom everything tried to trample from the moment he was born into the world. His story began as a tragedy even before his birth. His mother was poor. Unable to afford the delivery costs of a proper hospital, she chose a cheap public facility. And there, a medical accident occurred. During the delivery, the birthing tools accidentally severed a facial nerve, paralyzing one side of the newborn's lip and part of his jaw muscles. As a result, Sylvester Stallone would live his entire life with slurred speech, a congenital speech impediment. For someone dreaming of becoming an actor, it was a condition akin to a death sentence. But what happened next changed everything. He did not give up. Arriving in Hollywood with a speech impediment, he knocked on the door of every single audition he could find. The result was rejection every time. His pronunciation was weird, his facial expressions were awkward, and he had no prospects as an actor. One day he even applied for a casting call looking for 250 extras on a movie set, but he failed even that. He couldn't even land a role as just another face in an unspecified crowd. There was nowhere lower to go. His pockets were empty, and he was behind on rent. Ultimately, the choice he made was to appear in an adult film. This industry didn't care about how he spoke. $200 for 2 days of filming. It was barely enough to pay rent, but even that was tight. Until he turned 30, his savings had never exceeded $100. On days he was kicked out for unpaid rent, he slept rough in the corner of a bus terminal. There was a fact no one knew at the time. He had briefly appeared in a few mainstream movies rather than adult films back then, but the industry practice at the time was to exploit newcomers by paying them with a few t-shirts or grocery discount coupons instead of actual appearance fees. So he had no choice but to focus on adult films that at least paid real money. Later, after he became a massive star, the CEO of the adult film company contacted him. The tone was almost threatening. The demand was to hand over a huge sum of money if he didn't want the footage released to the world. However, Sylvester did not waver. He reportedly fired back with biting remarks, telling them to go ahead and release it, and that such garbage wasn't even worth paying a single dollar to buy. At the cliff edge of survival, Sylvester changed direction. He decided to take on the challenge of being a writer rather than an actor. He frequented the library and taught himself how to write screenplays. He wrote dozens of scripts. Exactly one of them caught the eye of a film studio. It was the 1970s masterpiece that left a mark on cinematic history, Rocky. The beginning of this screenplay was pure coincidence. One day, Sylvester watched a match of world boxing champion Muhammad Ali on TV. In that match, a virtually unknown fighter named Chuck Wepner appeared. No one had any expectations for him. However, this ordinary fighter delivered a massive shock by knocking Ali down with a powerful body blow. Although he ultimately lost with just 19 seconds left on the clock, the match that day became a national sensation. The sight of a man stepping into the ring with zero expectations and holding out to the very end with indomitable will touched a deep place inside Sylvester. Behind the camera, the story was completely different. He immediately started writing the script. Within the broad framework of an unknown, poor boxer facing off against the world champion, he wove a clumsy yet sincere love story between a man and a woman. He also personally wrote numerous iconic lines in the film. World champions were once unknown challengers. No punch hits as painfully as life. It doesn't matter how hard you can hit. What matters is how much you can get hit and endure. Several studios' eyes sparkled at this script about human perseverance, and they offered quite large sums of money. However, Sylvester had a dream more desperate than money. It was to star as the lead in the script he had written. At the time, studios were considering hot stars like Al Pacino and Robert Redford for the lead role. The virtually unknown Sylvester wasn't even on their radar. He rejected them flat out. Still, he did not give up. He continued negotiations by constantly raising the price of the script, offering a massive discount if they cast him as the lead. While the studios repeatedly refused, insisting that he absolutely could not be the lead, The price of the script soared to $360,000 by 1970s standards, an amount reaching $3 million when adjusted for today's inflation. It was money that could change his life in an instant. But Sylvester pushed even that staggering amount away. He demanded that he would sell the script for a mere $20,000 and take only minimum wage for his appearance fee, but on the condition that he absolutely had to be the lead. Ultimately, the studio accepted those terms. On the outside, it looked like a success, but on the inside, something was crumbling. When an unknown actor took the lead role, the studio drastically slashed the budget. Ironically, however, this constraint of a low budget actually made the film greater. The ice rink date scene was originally scheduled to be shot in a crowded place, but because they lacked the money to mobilize extras, they changed the setting to an empty ice rink. Sylvester revised the script on the spot. He created a setup where Rocky secretly slips money to a janitor to rent out the closed ice rink just for the two of them. As a result, the conversation between the two in the empty space came alive much more deeply. The famous art museum steps training scene was the same. Without the money to get an official filming permit, it was a scene they shot quickly by secretly running there at 4 a.m. when no one was around. Thanks to being filmed against the backdrop of the crack of dawn, Rocky's diligence in immersing himself in training before sunrise was naturally emphasized. Because the training scene was so realistic, a market vendor thought a real boxer was working out and threw an orange to the running Sylvester. And the scene of him naturally catching it was kept in the final version. There was a fact no one knew at the time. The scene where he looks at the large poster right before the final match was also a product of budget shortages. Due to a printing error, the short's color came out wrong, but without the money to reprint it, they revised the script and changed it into a scene where he is disrespected, being told that an unknown fighter has to wear whatever they give him. It was a stone that killed two birds, saving the cost of reprinting the poster while highlighting Rocky's mistreatment. When filming the scene where an angry Rocky throws a turkey outside, they only had enough money to buy exactly one turkey, so a staff member reportedly caught the flying turkey outside the window to reuse it. Breaking through its budget limitations with creative adaptations, Rocky became a legend in cinematic history. It grossed 200 times its production cost, ranking #1 at the global box office, and its cinematic quality was recognized with an Academy Award for Best Picture. The filming locations became tourist meccas. Even though the art museum hadn't even granted them permission, the film drew massive crowds of tourists, eventually leading to the erection of a Rocky statue. The act of running up those steps and raising both arms is referred to by the newly coined term, doing a Rocky, and even now, 50 years after the film's release, it remains Philadelphia's top tourist attraction. However, an invisible shadow followed Sylvester's success. Although he made a name for himself with Rocky, he had signed the contract under such unfavorable terms that he actually didn't have much money left in his hands. Yet there was a place he ran to as soon as he received his first paycheck. During his impoverished days of writing scripts, when he was starving and couldn't even feed his dog, he had to sell his beloved pet for a mere $50. That dog had been with him when he left his hometown and came to Hollywood all alone. Sylvester thought about that dog several times a day. As soon as he got the money, he tracked down the man he had sold the dog to and offered him 10 times the amount to buy it back. The man flatly refused. As Sylvester kept raising the price, the man eventually demanded $3,000, which was 60 times the original price. When Sylvester, who didn't have that kind of money, found himself in a tough spot, the man changed his condition. He asked to be cast as an extra with speaking lines in Sylvester's next movie. Desperate to get his dog back, Sylvester accepted the condition. It is said that he later took petty revenge by casting the man as a character who gets mocked by him in the movie. This is the part that most people never hear about. The man who actually gave Sylvester the hardest time was someone else. It was his own father. His father had been physically abusive since Sylvester was a child, and that resentment did not fade even after he became an adult. Seeing his son's success, his father caused a massive incident. He secretly wrote a script titled Rocky the Seven and started distributing it to film industry executives. This script, which featured Rocky's son as the protagonist, was of terrible quality, and he freely used the characters his son had created without any concept of copyright. Upon hearing the news, Sylvester was furious. He was enraged that his father, who had never been there for him during his hard times, was now trying to hijack his success. It is said that even his mother and younger brother stepped in to stop his father. In addition to the conflict with his father, the pressure of his next project weighed heavily on Sylvester. Number 1 at the global box office, an Academy Award for Best Picture. Since nobody had achieved such a feat, the expectations for his next work were beyond imagination. The media bluntly asked, "Wasn't Rocky just a lucky one-hit wonder?" To shake off those doubts, Sylvester locked himself in a small room and devoted himself to his next project. After about 2 years, he completed Paradise Alley. However, as soon as it was released, it was met with harsh reviews. Just as expectations had been raised by Rocky, the blade of criticism was equally severe. And then, without any warning, everything collapsed. To make matters worse, the professional wrestling film he ambitiously released, taking on the roles of writer, lead actor, and even director, was a complete failure. Since it was before the golden age of wrestling, the subject matter itself failed to attract interest, and only the sensational scenes became a topic of conversation. Having suffered 2 consecutive crushing defeats, Sylvester's stress reached its peak. He couldn't hide his mental breakdown, even fighting publicly with critics in interviews. Standing on the edge of a cliff, Sylvester decided to make a last stand. With the resolve that there would be no turning back if this failed too, he began writing the sequel to Rocky. A sequel to a successful movie is a double-edged sword. Expectations are so high that they are hard to meet, and one misstep could destroy the prestige of the original with one's own hands. Nevertheless, Sylvester took on the roles of writer, lead actor, and director for Rocky the Norks. The story of a protagonist who falls after a single success and attempts to make a comeback. It was a story that seemed to perfectly reflect his own present reality. And with this movie, Sylvester finally stood tall at the top once again. Earning a profit comparable to the original, it set an all-time box office record in the history of sequels up to that point. In the 1970s, a sequel was considered a massive hit, even if it only made 30 to 40% of the original's revenue. So the success of Rocky II was an achievement that more than made up for his recent slump in one fell swoop. The debate over whether the first or second movie is the greater masterpiece is still ongoing today. Having proudly erased the stigma of being a one-hit wonder, Sylvester now ushered in his golden age with another iconic character. It was Rambo, the long-haired warrior with bronze muscles, wearing a bandolier and a tightly tied headband. Today, many people misunderstand Rambo as just a reckless action character who blindly fires guns. But in fact, the character in the first Rambo movie was a profound and multidimensional figure. He was a veteran who survived the Vietnam War, but his home country did not welcome him warmly. The resentment of being used and discarded like a consumable on the battlefield. The sorrow of being the only survivor while all his comrades died. The frustration of not even being able to become a parking attendant despite wanting to start a new life. He was a character who represented all the emotions felt by actual veterans of that era. The scene at the end of the movie where he bursts into tears and pours his heart out brought tears to the eyes of many war veterans. Behind the camera, the story was completely different. The day Sylvester first saw the final cut of Rambo, he had to hold back tears, not because he was moved, but because it was so terrible. The initial version was a staggering 3-hour and 30-minute boring movie. He seriously considered spending his own money to buy the rights and block its release, fearing that his career would be shattered if it premiered like that. Eventually, thanks to his strong protests, Rambo was re-edited into a 93-minute film, and several scenes, including the ending, were reshot. In the original version, Rambo was supposed to die at the end. However, Sylvester worried that if people suffering from war trauma saw the character representing them meet a tragic death, their wounds would only deepen. He changed the script to keep Rambo alive, and that decision ultimately became the stepping stone that led to the 37-year-long Rambo series. Although the character devolved into an exaggerated figure who constantly fired guns from the third installment onward, the sequels continued all the way to a fifth movie. Having built global fame and astronomical wealth with Rocky and Rambo, Sylvester seemed to be living a life lacking nothing. However, an incident occurred where that wealth was robbed in an instant. The main culprit was his late-born half-sister, who was 18 years younger than him. One day this half-sister began publicly claiming that she had been physically abused by Sylvester. Sylvester vehemently denied it. Even their mother stepped forward and poured harsh words on the half-sister. She publicly stated that her daughter was taking over 60 hallucinogenic pills a day and was a drug addict who would do anything for drug money, calling it a ploy to extort her brother's money. In response, the half-sister declared that she had a recording tape containing her brother's weaknesses and was willing to go to court. Sylvester's side released an official statement. They strongly rebutted, saying that celebrities are bound to suffer from blackmail at some point, and even family members can become those blackmailers, adding that making up non-existent facts is the way of those who are after money. When the truth was finally revealed, it was something much darker than anyone had expected. Sylvester was determined to fight it out in court. However, his lawyers strongly dissuaded him. They warned that if he proceeded with the lawsuit, he would become prey for the media every time he appeared in court over the years. And even if he were found innocent, the various private details revealed during the trial would become the subject of gossip. It was an era without the internet. Media reports were more terrifying than swords. There were no channels to explain oneself. The lawyers repeatedly persuaded him that paying his half-sister and settling it quietly was the best way to protect his career. Ultimately, Sylvester agreed to meet his half-sister's demands on the condition that she would never speak about him again. However, the amount his half-sister demanded was beyond imagination. She demanded a lump sum of about $2.5 billion won by 1980s standards, which translates to nearly $8 billion won in today's money. Furthermore, there were conditions attached that he must pay her $20 million won a month for living expenses until she died, and a separate $70 million won a year for medical bills. Sylvester's side accepted all these demands, and the half-sister became an overnight millionaire. But she did not get to enjoy that immense wealth for long. She passed away from lung cancer at the young age of her 40s. Neither massive medical bills nor a glamorous lifestyle had any power in the face of terminal cancer. The very year his half-sister died, another tragedy struck Sylvester that completely shook his life. It was the death of his son, Sage Stallone. Sage was a fairly well-known son who had acted alongside his father in Rocky Fives, where the real-life father and son played a father and son on screen. Sylvester cared for his son so deeply that he repeatedly persuaded him to co-star after he had initially refused. That son suddenly passed away at the young age of his 30s. At the time of discovery, a large amount of prescription drugs was found near his bed, leading to an initial announcement of a drug overdose, but the autopsy revealed that the actual cause of death was a sudden heart attack caused by atherosclerosis. It was reported that there were no traces of drugs other than over-the-counter painkillers. Sylvester said, "There is no greater pain than a parent losing a child. I will probably never get over this loss for the rest of my life. Sage was the center of the universe for me and my wife." At the time of his death, his son was just days away from marrying his girlfriend. It is said that the only photograph found in his home, where he lived independently, was a single picture taken with his father. According to close associates, Sage had always idolized his father, Sylvester. There was a fact that no one knew at the time. Besides the deceased Sage, Sylvester had another son. Diagnosed with autism at the age of 3, he had not shown his face to the world for a long time. Shortly after his second son from his second marriage was diagnosed with autism, a divorce followed, and his brief third marriage also ended after just 2 years. While living alone, he met his current wife, Jennifer, at a restaurant. Sylvester fell in love at first sight. At the time, he was in his early 40s, and Jennifer was 19. Despite a staggering 22-year age gap, Sylvester did not hesitate. He said, "Thanks to Jennifer, I've come to love my life again," calling her the center of his happiness. After getting married, the couple had 3 daughters, who are famous for their beauty that rivals actresses, inherited from their mother. All 3 daughters were honored as Miss Golden Globe, and their individual Instagram followers reached 1.7 million, 1.82 million, and 930,000 respectively. However, after 25 years of marriage, Jennifer filed for divorce in 2022. Just 4 days after his wife filed for divorce, Sylvester covered up the tattoo of his wife's face on his bicep with a dog. It seemed their relationship had reached an irreversible point, yet within a month, the two dramatically reconciled and reunited. After their reunion, Sylvester said, "Through this opportunity, I realized that nothing is more important than family. I had prioritized work too much all this time. I only learned my lesson at the edge of a cliff." Following this incident, Sylvester has been making more frequent public appearances with his wife and spending more time together, sharing their daily lives with family through the reality show The Family Stallone. A man whose face was paralyzed due to a medical accident the moment he was born. A man who was rejected even when they were recruiting 250 extras. A man who survived by selling his beloved dog for $50. However, in the face of all that despair, he never completely broke down. The unprecedented record of leaving behind a top box office hit every decade from his 20s to his 70s was not merely the product of talent. It was the result forged by a human being who had passed through decades of rejection, poverty, and tragedy.